real history, not the made up history. Obviously, you guys know who I am. Welcome to the show, War Hamster Brady.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to today.
Me too.
Yeah, it's a good thing we only do these once a week. Otherwise, I would not get any work done. I put an awful lot. We'll go at the right pace to make our point, and we'll get it done eventually.
I don't think most people realize the amount of work that goes into, even for me, the cost of buying all these books, because I don't do a lot of my research online. I mean, I do probably 50%. I shouldn't say that. But it takes a lot of time looking up all the references, getting the context right, and all of that stuff.
Well, and also fact checking, which is, the information, because
yes,
as we were just talking about, not everything that's written is true.
True. Because, and I've said that many times on our afternoon show, you really have to research the authors. You have to research all of the footnotes. You have to research all of the other associated books, which is why the collection has grown so exponentially, because I wanted then, before I pick a book to do on that show, I want to read some of the books that they're basing their information on to know whether those people are in the ballpark. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. And I've had to carve out like 90 minutes every day just to make sure I keep up on my reading, because it's just, I do too much of my homework online. And sometimes, I can get the books online and find Cliff Notes versions of the ones I don't need to go in depth with. But, here's the beauty I'm jumping into now. See how thick this one is? I just don't have enough time in the day to do it all. But
I know I never thought I'd read a 1,000-page book, and I've read 2 of them now.
Benjamin Hunt, what part of Oregon are you from? I grew up in Lake Oswego. All right, while we're waiting for him to answer, let's jump into this. We got a lot to get to.
Okay.
Do you want to open us up and just give kind of a preview of where we're coming from and where we've been so far?
Yes. So just as a refresher, because all of this is going to matter in this particular show, we've spent the last several weeks talking about the Fabian Society. It was created in
Pilgrims.
No, I'm going back. I'm doing them all because they all come through. So you have the Fabian Society that was set up in 1884, which was an offshoot, as we mentioned earlier, the Fellowship of the New Life. And they basically created their own political party, the Labour Party, in the UK. And they had tinges of imperial race. They fully embraced eugenics. And these types of ideas are going to play out. They fully embraced the Commonwealth, basically bringing the United States back into the sphere of the British Empire, those types of things. We talked not in depth about the Milner Group, but its association with the Fabians, Alfred Milner, who again is going to show up in the story today. The fact that he had taken their bureaucratic infiltration mechanism, which again was part of the Fabian Society, into not just South Africa, but into India, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, to infiltrate all layers of society, culture, the government, the judiciary, the parliament, whatever it is, and have their, what they referred to as the Milner kindergarten, under their control. We talked about them being educated. We talked about Milner's trusteeship of the Rhodes Scholar, Cecil Rhodes, and the creation of the Association of Helpers as part of this. And then we moved on to the Pilgrims Society. And the Pilgrims Society was basically this bridge from the UK into the United States, of the elites, where we talked at length about their dinner clubs that met once a month over in the UK, and that model of the elites getting together and doing all of this planning under the social construct of dinner clubs. And the Pilgrim Society, set up both in London and New York, created the ability of them to have this network under the guise of an international, regularly occurring dinner club, if you will. So that's where we've been. Where are we going today?
Well, we are going to go to one of history's most famous pilgrims, none other than Winston Churchill. And we're going to continue our semi-chronological trip through all the events in world history with the pilgrims almost in chronological order. We skipped ahead last week for a reason. One thing the Colonel said in that little opening salvo there was they all have a couple themes in common, and the eugenics one is one that always pops into my head with almost everything that's done. So as we're going through this, especially at the close of this conversation today, keep that in mind because it's really important. Let's get Winston up there. Does that sound good?
Yep.
I will do my screen share. And we got a lot of good images today, so I'll be going back and forth. Sir Winston Churchill, the Right Honorable, known as the Roaring Lion. It's a picture of him in 1941 when he was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, smack dab in the middle of World War II, with a dour look on his face. Keep him up there for a bit. I don't have anything else to show for a bit. So what are we taught about Churchill? You know, he's this roaring lion. And I made the case to the Colonel. It's one of the best examples in history of the victors that get to write the history. The reality is that he is one of history's most quixotic and mercurial figures. I use the word quixotic, named after Don Quixote. And the dictionary definition is caught up in the romance of noble deeds and the pursuit of unreachable goals, idealistic without regard to practicality. So I may offend some people that think Churchill was the man who won World War II, etc. And he certainly was a part of that. Question is he part of the reason we got into it? And there's quite a few more questions, and we're going to go through those today. But high-level overview, this is a guy who shifted policies and beliefs throughout his life. He constantly failed upwards. Where have we seen that last week? This is a guy who drank and smoked cigars basically from dawn to dusk. There's some historians who say that his drinking was probably overstated, and there's some that say it's understated. So we'll fall somewhere in the middle. Yet the history books are going to call him one of the greatest men of the 20th century. And I would say he was certainly one of the most pivotal. And you're going to find as we go through, we can't get through Winston Churchill in a single episode. He was too influential on the 20th century. And to this day, the things that he did, and we're going to go over, impact us at this very minute in a big way. So he's born at his family's ancestral home, a place called Bienheim Palace in Oxfordshire. Nice little shack. Yeah, I'll leave that there for a bit. On his father's side, he was a member of the aristocracy. He's a descendant of John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough, who lived in 1650 to 1722. He became the first Duke of Marlborough because he helped James, Duke of York, secure the throne in 1685. And as we all know, that lasted for all of 3 years because the Glorious Revolution of 1688 replaced him with William and Mary. But he got to keep his dukedom. And he was John Churchill was one of Europe's greatest generals. Winston's paternal grandfather was a guy by the name of John Spencer Churchill, the 7th Duke of Marlborough. So the Spencer side of the family is nobility as well. Paternal grandfather was born in 1822, lived to 1883. Had to mention he went to Eton College and Oxford. A couple of your favorites.
Yes.
He would eventually be appointed to be the Viceroy of Ireland, House of Lords, and eventually the Privy Council of 1866. What's the Privy Council? Basically, members of parliament that directly advise whoever's sitting on the throne. I'm going to go through the history really quickly because Winston is even more interesting than his ancestors.
His royal ancestors?
Yeah, but I'm bringing this out to show that this guy was seriously born into royalty, or nobility, I should say.
Yes.
The Spencer family is a noble aristocratic British family from the 16th century, which means 1500s. That's the Dukedom of Marlborough. They had earldoms of Sunderland and the Earldom of Spencer, which the family got their name from. Eventually, the Barony of Churchill. Another Spencer descendant was Diana, Princess of Wales. It's a fun one. And Sir John Spencer would end up being knighted by none other than King Henry VIII, which is a very interesting story in and of itself. So that's his family. Okay, not quite done with his family. His dad is Lord Randolph Churchill, who was a Conservative Party member of Parliament. British politics, and back in that time, on what they would call the far right, you'd have the Tories, and the Tories were very pro-empire. Next to that, you'd have the Conservatives. That would be kind of like Rhino Republicans today. Then you'd have the Liberals, which would be old school Democrats, and then eventually you'd get the Labour Party, which would be the Fabian Socialists. They had four main, and they shift back and forth until they form a coalition and try to form a government and get a prime minister. Strange politics to Americans, but I think I have it figured out by now. But it's important to note that his father was a conservative, because Winston would bounce back and forth between the Conservative Party and the Liberals throughout his career. His mother was a woman named Jenny, became Lady Randolph Churchill. She's the daughter of an American businessman by the name of Leonard Jerome. Yes, Leonard was once known as, seriously, the King of Wall Street. So yeah, this was one of the very first dollar princesses married Winston Churchill's father, which fits in that whole theme of the Pilgrims Society, because it's the scions on one side of the Atlantic, the other, basically ignoring borders and coming together through marriage, through diplomacy, through banking deals, and through military exploits eventually. So that's his background. He begins boarding school at a place called St. George's in Ascot in Berkshire at the age of 7. Winston is poorly behaved and gets in a bunch of scuffles, doesn't do well academically at all. So they transfer him out. One more thing about his mother, his mother's father. This is the guy that was a partner in many deals with none other than Cornelius Vanderbilt. Yeah, that's important.
He has a whole history in and of himself.
Oh, we did Vanderbilt's. We did a whole show on him back.
No, I meant Powell. Yeah, it's a big deal.
Oh, you mean talking about Leonard Jerome?
Yeah, Jerome. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. That's a fun story. We got a lot to get to, so I didn't want to go into detail on him.
But that's his own dig.
Yeah, I think King of Wall Street's a pretty, that's a good place to sum it. So Winston's probably getting picked on a little bit at St. George's. He transfers a couple of times. Eventually goes to a place called the Harrow School because his father wanted him to prepare for a military career. And he spent the last 3 years of his pre-college years in wearing an army uniform as as a young cadet. That's what they would call them. Takes him 3 tries, but Winston finally gets into the Royal Military College. Now, as you go through his career, you're going to notice he gets a lot of positions that he has absolutely no background or education for. He's getting these jobs because of his bloodlines, who he knows. And that's going to be telling, so keep that in mind. We're up to 1895, and Winston is now, I believe, 21 years old. And he gets commissioned a second lieutenant on the 4th Queen's Own Hussars. And uses his mother's influence to get posted to a war zone. Winston wants action. So he goes to observe the Cuban War of Independence. While he's there observing, he joins the Spanish troops and became involved in some skirmishes. And the whole time he's sending reports back to a newspaper called the Daily Graphic. He's starting his writing career.
And who were the Cubans fighting at the time?
Go ahead.
The Spanish.
This is right before everything that goes down in 1895. The whole thing I talked about going on in Venezuela, happening at the same time, right, which basically started the great rapprochement between the United States and Great Britain. It's no coincidence at all.
Correct.
And of course, Winston then, while he's in the Western Hemisphere, decides to go to the U.S., writes a letter to Mom. He says, "I can't believe how extraordinary the American people are." I'm not even going to try to do his accent, okay? That's his first taste. Now, I couldn't find a definitive time when Winston officially became a Pilgrim. But given this background, the Pilgrims haven't even been formed yet. We're still in like 1895. But you can tell he's already making the connections.
Well, and let me also suggest that when we get to the point, because you're up to the Second Boer War, and we'll need to just do a little bit of background on the first one. But he's also, when you say that he's there as an observer, that's critical, because the observers are basically reconnaissance spies posing as journalists.
I've kind of figured you'd pick out that pattern. I know you got some stuff you want to add, so I'm going to go into India next, and then
what's your timeline on India?
Well, he gets there, I believe, in he leaves there in 1899. But
so
he gets, yeah.
So okay, and then when we get him to the Boers, I'll just do the first Boer War, because it's only just a couple of minutes, and then we'll pick up with him in the Second Boer War. Go ahead.
Yeah, that'll be right after I do India and his quick return home. So he gets himself stationed over in India for about 19 months, and he starts his self-education. He reads Plato, Gibbon, Macaulay, a few others. Did I say Macaulay? Macaulay's important. All these books are being mailed to him by his mother, so he's an avid writer and communicates quite well. He starts asking his mom to send copies of what's called the Annual Register, which is like England's political almanac, because he wants to learn about politics. He's about 23 years old at the time. He writes the first of his many books. I'm not going to get into all his books. Several of them are biographies. But the writing helped him fend off his lifelong depression. He served a brief stint in Sudan, and then decides he wants to leave the military in 1898 to 99. One of the things happening at this point is, although he's baptized Church of England, he becomes very anti-Christian, and he would be agnostic the rest of his entire life. 1899, he's home back in England. He runs for Parliament as a conservative and loses. He would call himself a conservative and a Tory Democrat. So that's this blend that he's trying to balance the two sides of the political scale. And again, he goes back and forth. Some of his opinions at this point in time is he was against Irish Home Rule, and he was loudly opposed to women's suffrage. Keep that in mind, because he's going to change his mind on that, like everything else. Then he's working as a journalist for something called the Morning Post. Now, he had anticipated the Second Boer War, and he's going to sail to South Africa, but I want the Colonel to cue this up.
So we're going to go back in time to around 1880. You've heard the timeline of his background. So just to set the tone, because again, it's in the news today with the Afrikanders. The Afrikanders, sorry. Those are Boers. those are Dutch farmers that went to South Africa in the early 1800s. So while they're migrating into the southern part of Africa, you also have the British set up at the Cape Colony. So that's the big port. So as you go around, we don't have the Suez Canal. As you go around for trading the maritime Great British Empire, you have to have places where you can restock, and those are the critical maritime passages. So the British is in their Cape Colony at the time. So north of there, you have the Dutch, and they're peaceful farmers. They've integrated into the African community. They all get along. There's not a whole bunch of violence going on or anything like that. The problem, which will come to them, is that the British have found over in Rhodesia and other places in that area gold. And they're about to expand their empire, and they need money. And so they're rabid about finding gold to fuel the British Empire and their maritime fleet. So you have the British, who they send spies into that area under the auspices of geologists, and they're convinced that all of the territory that these Dutch farmers, the Boers, are occupying have gold. And so they begin to attempt to try to, and they're called the Orange Free State and Transvaal. You'll hear that a lot in your reading when you read about this. Those were the two territories that the Boers occupied. And so the British in 1877 just unilaterally say the Transvaal is ours. Now, it's occupied with people, but they just say it's ours. And they're like, yeah, I don't think so. And they basically create these, because of this declaration, they all get together, the Boers do, and they said, hey, they have an imposing army, so we need to figure out a defensive way in order to protect ourselves. So they come up with this stay behind concept. They pre-position weapons all throughout the perimeter of their territory. So as the British, and then they start peacefully non-complying with this British edict. And the British get so frustrated because they're like, hey, we're the big empire. You can't not allow us to take your territory. And so they start a huge influx of British troops into that Transvaal area. And the Boers, as they proceed into that area with their stay-behind capability, go in and fall in on all of these weapons that they've put in there and annihilate the British forces. Now, this is the British Empire. The British Empire is embarrassed that they got booted from the Transvaal area by a bunch of farmers. They're pissed. And so there's, to your point about him being over in India and all of this other thing, yes, they were already anticipating and planning a re-attack of this area because they want the gold. So in the meantime, the British, having licked their wounds and said, oh, we're sorry for that transgression, but hey, we will deal with you as the sovereign government of this area, but we do want to mine it, so can we work out a deal? So they do. So there's all of these British gold mining companies in there mining the gold. And the British is basically sneaking in military capability under the guise of these mining, because they're not going to allow the Boers to maintain control of this area, because they don't want to share the loot, so to speak. So in 1895, there's the famous Jameson raid. And at the time, which is why I wanted to start off with this background, you remember that Milner, who was the trustee of Cecil Rhodes Trust, which is what gave us the London School of Economics, the Milner Kindergarten, who then floods South Africa with all of their infiltration of the government down there. Well, it just so happens that Cecil Rhodes is the Cape Colony prime minister. And at this time, during the Milner raid, Cecil Rhodes is the one that gave the okay for basically a false flag to do the Jameson raid. They had planted spies to rise up these British mining companies. Well, that doesn't happen. So the Jameson raid famously fails. And now for a second time, the British has egg on their face. They got defeated again by these dastardly Boers. And so in 1897, Joseph Chamberlain, who was the British colony secretary, appointed Alfred. So Cecil Rhodes gets fired, right? He was a disgrace. He failed with this false flag event. And they bring in Milner, Alfred Milner, the peaceful guy that's over here just doing these, nice things with the round table and doing administration and all this stuff. No, he's going to replace Cecil Rhodes, and he's going to be the prime minister or governor, whatever you want to call him, of the Cape Colony when they launched the Second Boer War. And as we find out, Milner starts amassing massive troops along the border of the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. And so the Black community, that's the indigenous people of South Africa, are supporting the Boers because they've lived there with each other for almost now 100 years. And so they've got a massive problem on their hands. And as they start amassing these troops, Churchill shows up. And what does he show up as? A reporter. And so he embeds himself with a bunch of British soldiers dressed in civilian attire. And they take a train ride. They're just going to write a story about the miners and, hey, we're not a threat or anything. But the Boers find out that the train has all these British soldiers on it. And the train gets attacked. And Churchill gets captured. So Churchill manages somehow to escape. And he hides in one of the British managers' houses. And when he comes back to, so he gets out, he does a whole bunch of train rides, eventually gets out of the territory. And when he comes back, he has his brother with him, and they're both involved in the fighting.
It's his cousin. That's Charles Spencer Churchill. He was a 9th Duke of Marlborough. Winston didn't get the title side of the family. It's his cousin, Charles Spencer, is the one he's with.
Oh, I had his brother. Let me go back and check that.
If it's Charles Spencer, that is his cousin.
I know there's a brother involved here too.
Okay.
And so
I didn't get the brother. You got the cousin. It's okay. Go.
The Boers continue this fight, and they're much more successful this time because they have like 10 times the amount of troops. This is a massive operation, and this is a no holds barred, right? So they're going to this reminds us of some things that's happened much more recently. They go through and they burn every village. It's just total scorchers. And so you have all of these women and children because most of the men are hiding to launch these, what we would refer to as guerrilla attacks, although they are the actual people that are defending their homeland at the time. All of the literature calls them guerrillas. They were not guerrillas. They were the people that lived there that were under attack. So the British decide that they're going to round up all of the women and children that they find in these villages and the elderly people that are not capable of fighting and put them in the first ever recorded concentration camps. Now, they establish at least 45 documented concentration camps filled to the brim of women, children, and elderly. And those were only the white ones. So they build over 60 concentration camps in this area for blacks. And there was a commission called the Fawcett Commission that documented over 50,000 people died in those concentration camps from disease and starvation because no one was feeding them. There was no healthcare, no doctors, no nothing. They were very closed quarters. And there were all kinds of allegations about them actually infecting them with stuff so that they actually would die, which harkens back to the eugenics piece of this. And this all happened while Milner oversaw the entire operation. So later on, I'll just throw this in there. In 1901, because I know you're going to get to the point where he gets elected to the parliament, here's his famous quote. A couple of years later, this was not like a distant memory or anything else. He said, in reference to the camps, once that commission report got authored, the camps were, quote, the minimum of suffering, unquote.
And it's important to note that this is the world's first concentration camps. It's where that was invented.
Yes.
And the reason this history is so important and the reason we spend so much time on this 1895 to 1902 period, and I've talked about this on the show a couple of times, but I want to hammer this home. 1895, gold is discovered in Guyana next to Venezuela. England is, Venezuela goes to America to help represent their territorial rights while England is trying to impose their will upon the gold claims in Guyana. This almost comes to war between England and America. We could not take on the British Navy. We would have lost many cities on the eastern seaboard. But this is post-industrial America. We were already prepared to basically take out Canada across the 3,000-mile frontier border. Now, that would have been a stalemate. But England, at the same time, the British Empire, they've got to worry about this Boer War. At the same time, the German, and we're going to get to this, that's a big part of today's story. So I want to cue this up. The German military power is rising at the same time. And you darn straight, England considers that a bigger threat than America. That's what led to what they call the Great Rapprochement, where England reached across the pond and started saying, hey, we got to be friends with America. We'll respect the Monroe Doctrine for the first time. And that's what launched the Pilgrims Society. Real quick, there was a question in chat about whether the British East India Company was involved in this. They're involved in laying out everything that happened, but the British East India Company was disbanded in the 1850s. There's a lot of reasons for that. It's a whole history of it in and of itself. What you're seeing here are basically British East India Company kind of dissolves. These are the pieces that came afterwards. Sort of like when we busted the trusts in America, what reemerged was a bunch of multinational corporations, which were bigger and stronger. So these are the descendants of the British East India Company, but it's a really good question.
Yeah, it didn't go away. It just morphed into another reptile.
Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons. Like I said, that's a whole story in and of itself. I forgot to show one quick picture. I'm going to do that real quick because I just think it's such a great picture. This is the Duke of Marlborough, 1702 portrait. I just love the hair. Probably a wig.
Oh, hold on. Let me get it up there.
His Grace, the Duke of Marlborough, Winston's ancestor. Very regal looking. I mean, these guys do think a lot of themselves. Anyways, I found that picture. I wanted to share it. All right, back to Winston. obviously, Colonel covered his escape and gave him a bit of fame back home. So after all that, 1900 we're at, he runs again as a conservative and wins a seat in Parliament at the age of 25. He's 25 years old. This story so far would have been worthy. We could just stop right there, and Winston would be a person worth talking about, right? But we're just getting started.
And also, they pointed out in the chat, at the same time of everything we just talked about, the Boxer Rebellion is going on with the English and the Chinese as well. So they're stretched.
Yeah. Opium Wars. Oops.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the point. They were stretched. And that's why they decided, hey, you know what? We can make peace with our cousins in America. Much better than having a 5-front war. And then they decided to, of course, they always had that never-ending goal of reclaiming the crown jewel, which is the American colonies.
Correct.
That's always underlying the surface of what they do. He writes a book about Ian Hamilton's march, about a South Africa experience, gets more fame and fortune. Remember, members of Parliament aren't getting paid, and he does not inherit a ton of the family fortune. So to pay his bills, he goes on a book tour through the United States, UK, and Canada. While he's in the U.S., he meets people like, Mark Twain, William McKinley. Didn't we say Mark Twain was a pilgrim?
Yes.
William McKinley, who was the president who reluctantly got us into the Spanish-American War of 1898, which is when basically America's first war of imperialism.
Yep.
He also meets Teddy Roosevelt, and the two of them don't get along. And I want to take a quick comedic break because I got a history rap song about Teddy and Winston. Oops.
Where do you find these things?
It's a great channel. You ready? Is it sharing?
Yep.
Are you hearing it?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to
Winston Churchill! Winston! Theodore Roosevelt! Bully, a challenge! I love competition! Now where would I mount the stuffed head of a Winston? I'm into fitness, digging ditches through an isthmus, rough riding down a Cuba line. What's up, bitches? I keep my rhymes pure like my food and drugs. I'm an American stock, and you're the British Alma. I mean, for Christ's sake, look at that mug! At least grow a spruce mustache and cover part of it up! And let's face it, you're not all that great! You tossed away lives in Gallipoli like they were scraps off your plate! Your whole miserable country is the size of one state! And see my way through running that without donning my pants? Now you go toe-to-toe with me, you bloated drunk old man! Why don't you do-si-do on over to a 12-step club? Must the trust fund lush with my American muscle to walk softly over here and give my big stick a suckle? Pass me a cigar and a large glass of brandy. I'm about to take you out prematurely, like your family. I'm the rhyme minister, fresh in a hat and dinner jacket. You look like a mix of Epic Lloyd and a Pringles packet. I was saving the planet from an axis of darkness while you were back home opening national parks. You were born asthmatic, you're going to choke hard while I wake up every day and chain smoke cigars. I'll fight you on the beaches, I'll fight you on the beaches. Any way you want to fight, I'll fight you and I'll beat you. See, I might be battling you even though I'm toasted, but tomorrow I'll be sober and you'll still be roasted. My parents died when they were young and it was morbid, but at least they didn't ditch me when they were alive like yours did. Oh shit, World War too soon? Well, Teddy's dropping bombs, so you best go, hadn't you do? You should be ashamed of your military honor. Everyone knows you're back at home like thank God for Pearl Harbor. Don't worry, the U.S. will give you a pass. Just change your poster to keep calm and kiss my cousin's ass. Set it out. I don't think it's very fair for a British bulldog to melee with a teddy bear. You're no man, you're an overgrown Boy Scout. I should stuff you in a pram just so you can throw your toys out. They put your fat head on a mountain to save face, but if Rushmore was a band, then you'd play bass. Look at who's about, the dude's about to lose the bout to Churchill. A bullet to the chest won't stop you, my words will. A bullet can't stop the bull moose! CR will give WC the full deuce! Whatever shit you throw at me, I'll just return to sender! I'll battle to the end and I will never surrender! Oh, whoa! Poster! You just saw!
right. That was good.
The chat like that. Yeah, that's a great channel. I'll give them credit. Give them a quick shout out. It's what is the channel called? ERB, which is something rap, whatever. It's just ERB. All right, back to the serious stuff. It's really funny that Teddy and him didn't like each other. So because I don't consider them either one of them real heroes of history, but the history books sure make them both, two of the most important men of the 20th century. And we have, anyways, whoever wrote that song actually knows their history, so it was pretty good. All right, back in the House of Commons, Winston Churchill. He would take positions that sometimes angered conservatives, sometimes angered liberals. That's pretty typical of him. But he'd later write that he was constantly drifting steadily to the left. Remember, his father was a conservative. He considered a central party to unite conservatives and liberals.
So let me just add, it was his brother, his younger brother, John Strange Spencer Churchill. They referred to him as Jack.
Okay. So I've got his cousin,
the
ones that demanded him, along with Winston, the surrender of Pretoria.
Yeah, they probably all were there. They loved getting their little medals.
Family business. Well, at least give them credit. These guys actually did see action. So
we don't know what action they saw. His brother was wounded. I'll say that. Churchill obviously was not.
He considered himself a free trader who opposed protectionism. That's a really important topic. We're not going to dive too deeply into that, but I'll get wonky on tariffs and several other shows. Churchill ends up defecting to the Liberal Party in 1904. Some of his positions: he supported trade union rights. That's important. He opposed increased military expenditures. He'll change his mind on that later too. He opposed something called the Aliens Bill, which would have curbed Jewish immigration. He was very pro-free entry into England. That's very Pilgrimist of it, isn't it?
Well, and understand, I just want to throw this in there, because I, as a typical American, when I first started traveling overseas, we have these stereotype views. This was in the early 1990s of what these countries look like in Europe. And I was actually shocked when the first time, which I went in the December of 1990 to London and to visit a friend of mine that was stationed there. And I was shocked at the amount of Indian people that were there. Because of their colonialization, and it now makes much more sense to me knowing that the CIA transplants their operatives into the United States, into these little communities. The same was true for a very long time of the British Empire. So they would take in any of their colonies, obviously India being one of them, and bring back pockets of their elite children to grow them into the British Empire mindset. And then they would go back. And this was true of China. This was true of many of the different places, Egypt, that the British Empire had wanted to infiltrate using Milner's background and approach, that they bring these people back to the British, the UK. And that was kind of a shocker to me, because I didn't know any of this stuff back then, that there were so many other nationalities walking around in Britain.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Last week we did the father of globalization, who basically created the entire open border concept. That guy was a Pilgrim.
Yeah.
Here we have Winston Churchill talking about open borders.
Yes. And
we're going to get into the causes of World War I. But, what happens when you kill off an entire generation of young men in Europe? You've got to replace them. And the Colonel just explained why. This concept of the Great Replacement Theory has been orchestrated as far back as the 1890s.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about here. Everything we're battling today, the seeds of that was left right there. And it irritates, it angers me to no end that this was done by these gigantic assholes.
And what angers me even more is the ignorance of the people who are supposedly the truth tellers of today, they don't go to the root of the problem. I just made that post yesterday about they stop at Soros. Soros didn't create any of this.
All right, let's get moving on Churchill because we got some good stuff to get to. 1906, Liberals win in a landslide. Churchill's already become a Liberal, so he stays in Parliament. He'd become close with Liberal leaders John Morley and, of course, David Lloyd George, who would become the Prime Minister of England and from during World War I. So Churchill and he are buddies as far back as 1906. So he's going to get cushy cabinet positions. Morley himself was big in the he was a big newspaper editor. So this is how you got Morley pushing all Churchill's propaganda out. So that's how that happened. So now that Churchill then starts getting a series of ministerial positions, 2 years later, Asquith becomes the prime minister, and he keeps Churchill around. Asquith stays in for a number of years. Some of the positions Churchill holds. He's an Under-Secretary of State for the Colonial Office and helped draft the Transvaal Constitution, South Africa.
And keep in mind that position is critical to Milner, because Milner's the one that's going in and infiltrating all of their colonial possessions.
When was apartheid put in?
Well, it was always the rule. That's the reason. I mean, it goes back to the late 1800s when they built the separate prison concentration camps. They were always segregationists, always.
Okay, his next job is the president of the Board of Trade. This would be sort of like a commerce secretary. Is there anything in this history of Winston Churchill that we've seen so far make him qualified for that? Anything? Finance? Anything? Nothing. All right. This makes him the youngest cabinet member in the British government since 1866. He's 33 years old. He would arbitrate industrial disputes between ship workers and employers, and it's one of the first of many times he's involved in labor disputes. At times, the labor side people really liked his stances. At other times, they hated him. He was too pro-business. The guy couldn't make up his mind. He always takes a middle road. That's basically demonstrates exactly who Winston Churchill was politically.
And who was in control of the labor movement? The Fabians.
He would work with Lloyd George on social reform. He's the guy that introduced the 8-hour workday. I wrote 80, it's actually 8. He promoted unemployment insurance scheme. He denounces a guy named McKenna's policy of naval expansion, arguing, he goes, I refuse to believe that war with Germany is inevitable. This is in like 1908. That's his position, and he went firmly out on that and wrote about it. He allied with Lloyd George's proposal for unprecedented taxes on the rich to fund the liberal welfare programs,
which was one of the Fabians' favorite programs.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, he proposed the abolition of the House of Lords altogether, which, of course, the House of Lords vetoed because they wanted a unicameral legislature. 1910-11, he becomes the Home Secretary. Argues for prison reform. He commuted many death sentences. Comes out, and now he supports women's suffrage. Didn't he oppose it like 6 years ago? Yeah. He had a caveat.
One of the Fabians' checklist.
Well, it is. But you can see where he's getting influenced.
Yes.
Yeah, but he says only if the majority of males supported it. And now all the women's suffrage people are really mad at him. And one guy, who's a big women's suffrage supporter, actually assaults Winston Churchill and had to spend a few years in jail. So he's infuriating both sides of it, a lot of these arguments, by straddling the middle. He had to deal with more labor riots. He's called too soft on the rioters, blah, blah, blah. And there's something in 1911 called the Agadir Crisis in April of 1911, where we get the threat of war between France and Germany. Churchill, as the Home Secretary, suggests an alliance with France and Russia to counter possible German expansion. Same guy that just said that war with Germany wasn't inevitable. And of course, this would alter Churchill's views on naval expansion. 1 year later, Prime Minister Asquith appoints Churchill the First Lord of the Admiralty. Does he have any naval experience, Colonel?
Zero.
He could ride horses, played a lot of polo. Does that count?
No.
He then goes to spend the next 2 years, starting 1911, focusing on naval preparation for war. And this, of course, is in response to the German naval laws by Kaiser Wilhelm II, which committed Germany to build a navy capable of competing with the Royal Navy. He also explored how aircraft could be used for military purpose and had 100 seaplanes were constructed. So Winston Churchill is maybe considered the father of wartime aviation. So now we're going to talk about why World War I happened and what was Churchill's influence on that. So I'm going to get some screen shares out. Yeah, I think I want to do the demographic graphs first. Okay. So I created some tables so we can see everything. Got the major players in World War I: the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Russia, USSR, Ottoman Turks, and the United States. This is their GDP. You look at 1870, I want to compare. The United Kingdom is bigger than Germany. 1880, Germany's getting a little closer. 1890, they're fully industrialized. By 1900, they're an economic threat. By 1910, Germany's got a bigger economy than the United Kingdom. That's a big deal. France stayed a little bit smaller, but steadily grew. Of course, they dropped in the 30s with the Great Depression. Russia's gotten interesting because they went from one of the smallest economies to started to grow, really boomed in 1900. 1910, they were at the same, their economy was just as big as United Kingdom and Germany. And then, of course, the Bolshevik Revolution hits and their economy drops in the 1910s. So by 1920, they were tiny. And then regrew again pretty fast with the help of American
industrialists
and pilgrims, and many of whom were pilgrims.
Yes.
You can see the Ottoman Turks were tiny throughout this entire area, and we'll get to why they got decimated earlier, because 50 years prior to this chart, they were really still one of the world's ultimate powers. United States, you can see, started in about second place, and by the end of 1940s, they were bigger than the other five economies put together. Probably a lot of it has to do with the fact we never got bombed in World War I, but the American system was growing incredibly fast. That's why the United Kingdom decided, hey, our economy's not growing as fast. We got debt all over the place. Maybe we need some rich partners. So I think that's an important graph.
It's huge about the Germany, UK. Yeah, that's huge.
That's one of the major causes of World War I. We'll get into this deeper. Here is the population of the various countries. And you can see the United Kingdom is growing. Germany's a little bit bigger. Starts to really grow as they get more successful. France stays about the same. But it's the Russians, with their massive population base, that really sets off a lot of the distrust. And that's coming from Germany, because they've got Russia, to their east, and they've got England and France to their south. They feel like they're a little bit threatened. That's why they're building up their military. So it's the Russian population that really is frightening Germany. I don't think these Ottoman numbers are accurate. Here's a graph of the population. Shows it even more severely. So all the Russians died during the revolution.
Yeah.
You like these charts? They're fun to put together. Standing army strength. Through the 1870s, United Kingdom didn't have a very big land army compared to Germany, which had 350,000 up to 550. And of course, post-Versailles Treaty, they could only have 100,000, which was part of the treaty. France had a much bigger land army than the United Kingdom did. And Russia was big, just massive in terms of land army. Ottoman Turks were pretty big considering their population. They had about the same size as the United Kingdom. That's going to matter when we get to World War I. And the U.S. didn't have a large standing army.
Well, we're not allowed to have a large standing army until 1947.
Yeah, so we see 1940, we were already getting pretty big. So, and of course, what the UK counts on is their gigantic navy. This is by warship tonnage, and there really was a arms race in naval stuff in the 1890s and early 1900s. United Kingdom is much bigger than Germany, but Germany's determined to catch up. They got to more than half the size. France was always a little bit smaller. Russia, because they didn't have a warm water seaport, never had a huge navy. Ottoman Turks, once the world's greatest navy, had basically decimated down to nothing after a century of wars. And the U.S. was just getting started, but by the time World War I comes out, we've got as big as navy as Germany. And by 1920, we're the second biggest in the world. By 1940, we're the biggest. So all this has to do with why World War I breaks out. But I want to do a little bit of history. So
and let me just say that it's almost like a sleight of hands with what we now know going on behind the scenes with the Pilgrims Society. The UK is shifting their costs onto the US. If you look at those charts, to me, the takeaway is that if you are going to create this global power, and you orchestrate a whole bunch of false flags to make boogeymen in order to justify this military industrialization, if you can do that and shift the costs at the same time, because keep in mind, these people, in their mind, the US and the UK are together. They're not separate as far as capability goes, because they know that their embedded network is going to be able to manipulate the US behind the UK on everything that they do.
Yeah, those deals have already been made prior to World War I behind closed doors, and it started with the Pilgrim Society, which is why we're talking about them in the first place.
Yes.
All right, real quick, just to get a visual of what World War I is going to look like. Allied powers are in green. The Central Powers are in yellow. That's Germany, Austria, Hungary, still a gigantic empire, Bulgaria, and Ottoman Empire. We're going to get into all the reasons England had to want to fight these, but Austria-Hungary Empire, well, let me put it this way. Two of these empires disappear off the map, and the other one gets put into timeout. That's what ends up happening.
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah. So that's the map we're looking at. I'll leave it up there for now, but why did World War I happen? Well, we're told that in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, a 19-year-old anarchist named Gabrielo Princip fired 2 shots into an open car. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who's the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, is shot, and 6 weeks later, the continent is on fire. We're taught that 4 years later, 20 million people are dead because this 19-year-old shot a guy, and we had to kill 20 million people over it. That's what we're told. The textbooks are going to tell you the same story. They're going to say the assassination was the spark. The alliance system was the kindling. By that, they mean all these different colors had different alliances. So if you attacked one, the other one, the others would have to go to war with you. It's considered mutual deterrence. And we'll get into why that doesn't work. The history books will tell us the whole thing was a tragic accident. But we know better. So let's get into the real history. And this is going to be the deeper history that you can get taught at a better history lesson. And then I'll get to the real history. So 1871, Otto von Bismarck unites Germany. He puts one of the most industrial, economic, and military powers smack dab in the middle of Europe. Prior to that, it was a bunch of principalities. They weren't united. They weren't a military threat. But the German people were very successful academically, economically, and they're do pretty well militarily. They just weren't combined. Well, Bismarck changes all that. They create something called the Weltpolitik, which means world policy. Germans are now filled with pride and a sense of purpose. 1888, Kaiser Wilhelm II takes the throne and fires Bismarck. Wilhelm wanted a true global empire. He wanted territories, naval dominance, international prestige to match its power. This terrifies Britain, as it should. That is a competitor. At the time, 58% of British food came from overseas. If they lose control of the sea lanes, Britain's going to starve. They cannot lose control of the sea lanes. Now you've got a very, very powerful industrial Germany, not too far away, connecting by the North Sea, building a modern navy to rival them. That's one of the major causes of this. Both countries engage in a naval arms race. 1906, HMS Dreadnought is built, and that's the greatest warship ever at the time. Of course, all this arms race adds to England's massive debt, and they're already in debt because they just fought the Boer Wars, not to mention a few other things going on in China.
To steal their gold.
All the European countries are starting to build up land armies. You can smell what's coming. And this is real history. This is accurate. The alliance system was set up, and it's designed for deterrence. If you attack one, you attack all. Problem with that is that entire system fails as soon as someone calls the bluff. It was actually a setup for instant escalation. And you look at what our nuclear deterrence was during the Cold War, and you can see that how close we came to Armageddon with that type of deterrence. This was nuclear deterrence. Didn't work, did it? All right, a little bit more back history. Can you share that screen? Big part of this story is the Ottoman Empire. And if you look at everything that's colored, that was once upon a time the Ottoman Empire. Territory lost between 1800 and 1877 was up here in Romania and down there in Algeria. They lost a bunch more from 1878 to 1913, including Egypt, to the British. They lost Georgia, Bulgaria, most of the Balkan territories they lost. This is prior to World War I. And what you see here in the green is what the Ottoman Empire was in 1914 when the war broke out. So how'd they get there? Through the 18th century, the once mighty Ottoman Empire had whittled away through wars. They failed to industrialize. They had a national awakening in the Balkans. People wanted to be nationalists. That's why they lost those. You had the Wahhabis of Arabia revolted. That would end up being the Lawrence of Arabia story. In 1818, they acknowledged Serbia as an independent nation. Serbia, of course, is where World War I stuff basically was set off. You had the Greeks declaring war on the Sultan. Turks and Greeks never got along. By the mid-century, 1850s,
still don't.
The Ottoman Empire is called the sick man of Europe. And there's a lot of causes for this. The empire, their Christian population was much better educated than the Muslims. Reason for that is pretty systemic. The Arabic alphabet was very ill-suited for the Turkish language that they spoke. It made it really hard to learn. It was a bad alphabet for their language. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that's a problem. The other problem is Muslim children were also hindered by the amount of time they had to spend learning Arabic and Islamic theology, while the Christian fellow citizens could basically study the things they needed to become successful economically. And this created a huge economic imbalance kind of a dual class in Turkey, where the majority was the underclass. You had multiple wars that had left the empire in debt, and we're going to come back to that. Then, of course, you had 1877, 1878. There was the Russo-Turkish War, which ended with a decisive Russian victory, and the Ottoman holdings in Europe declined sharply. Next, we get to the Suez Canal. Suez Canal was built in 1869 by a French-led company. It's very interesting. If you can go from London to Mumbai in India, it's 7,200 miles if you use the canal. If you've got to go around Africa, it is almost twice as far. So you understand how important the Suez Canal was once it was built in 1869 to the English. They've got to have a better bridge to their east-west connections, and a lot of commerce goes through there. That's basically propping up the British Empire, the empire where the sun never sets. So in 1869, it's built. Egypt is still technically an Ottoman province. Egypt held a large block of the shares, but they were in a lot of debt. Egypt was, mostly to European banks. So in 1875, British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, remember that name?
Yep.
Benjamin Disraeli is one of the most important historical figures of the 1800s, and he absolutely was a Rothschild stooge. There's no doubt about that. He would buy up Egypt shares. Basically, 44% of the company for it is basically £4 million. And this is one of the greatest examples in history of what we call economic imperialism. 7 years later, the British military occupation to protect their interests after what was known as the Urabi Revolt, which I'd be willing to bet that I think the story of British spies provoking that to give them the excuse to occupy the canal actually happened.
Right.
And of course, the British would stay there for decades. This makes the Turks and the Brits even more natural rivals, and gives the Turks even more reason to ally with Germany and Austria-Hungary. All right, the real story. All that stuff is historically correct, but that is not the entire story. I'm going to tell you the real story of why this war happened. Let me go through I'm just giving you one second. If you want to fill in some blanks for a second, I want to make sure I got the maps right.
My blanks. Well, it's interesting that you talk about those different trade routes. And I would also say, when you made that comment about the Greeks and the Turks not getting along, they still don't get along. That's the whole. Yeah. That's still to this day a huge rivalry with Cyprus and
Cyprus comes into play, right? Like in the next paragraph.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get into it. I'm ready.
Okay.
All right, folks. Those are all those histories you've heard. Crown Prince Franz Ferdinand was shot. All these things happened. They had all the alliances. We had the Suez Canal. You had all the tensions. That's all real, but that's not enough reason to kill 20 million, European men and start a world war and basically change the face of history. That is not enough. The real history is the Middle East had already been carved up in bank boardrooms and diplomatic conclaves decades before. All wars are banker wars. The real story is about money and debt. The Ottomans were drowning in debt by the 1860s. So for the first time in history, this proud empire had to borrow money from European banks. The original loan was for about £8 million, which seemed manageable. It was not. Over the next 2 decades, the Ottomans would take more loans totaling over £200 million. Of course, the Ottomans never got anything close to £200 million because you had all these financial intermediaries taking underwriting fees as high as 30%, and they get their money before it gets to the Ottoman Empire. So you're racking up debt and interest, not even getting the money you borrowed. And there's not a damn thing you can do about it. By 1875, the Ottoman debt took up over 40% of their annual budget. there's economists today that warn about debt to GDP and everything like that. Well, these guys have blown that out of the water. By 1875, the Ottomans default on their debt, and this causes a massive disruption in the European bond markets. So the European bankers get together and they form the European creditors and bankers, they create something called the OPDA, the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. The European Union created a bureaucracy. I'm sorry, the Europeans, not the Union, doesn't exist yet. The European bankers create a bureaucracy inside a sovereign nation that's run by bankers and bureaucrats. And they're given control of the empire's finances so they can pay off the bondholders directly before the Ottoman government gets their own money. They had more bureaucrats working in Turkey than Turkey had working on their own finances. They're also, the OPDA is helping European companies get resource concessions all around the Ottoman Empire and its neighbors. Ladies and gentlemen, this was a hostile financial takeover of a sovereign state done by banks without a shot being fired. Kind of a big deal.
It's a huge deal because it's still going on today.
Mm-hmm. Then we get the race for the Mesopotamian oil. Everyone knows where Mesopotamia is, right? I didn't need to get an oil map.
No.
There's an Armenian-British businessman named Kolostai Gulbenkian, and he spends a decade studying the geology of the region. And he sends a report on oil back to Europe in 1892, and he said they were sitting on an ocean of oil. By 1889, a bunch of German industrialists, financed and funded by Deutsche Bank, goes to the Ottomans and they secure a concession to build a railroad known as, let's see, take a look at it, the Berlin to Baghdad Railroad. You put that up there. There's Berlin up here, and there's Baghdad. And it runs straight through the middle of the Ottoman Empire. And that's going to Austria-Hungary, through Serbia. And ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the biggest unknown reasons for World War I, because this would be, this railroad starts in 1903. It's going to be to connect Berlin to the Ottoman city of Baghdad. Germany would then establish a port on the Persian Gulf. It's a 1,000-mile line through modern-day Turkey, and it would threaten Britain's west to east monopoly from the Suez Canal. It also threatened Russia, as it would give Germany more influence towards the Caucasian frontier and in Persia, where Russia currently had a dominant share of the market. So this one railroad alone threatens the economic interests of gigantic Russia to the north, or to the east, and England to the west. Just a railroad. It's a big deal. William Darcy enters the picture. He gets a concession in 1901 to get exclusive rights to the oil in Persia for the next 60 years. It's one heck of a concession. These sultans weren't very good businessmen.
And Persia is modern-day Iran.
Yes. Darcy's trying really hard to strike oil, and by 1908, 7 years in, he's just about ready to close the doors and call it quits. And then a major oil strike hits, as they're packing up the equipment when the oil strike hit. It was that close to being called a failure. Soon after that, the world's biggest oil refinery is built. And now we know we've got liquid gold throughout this region. Think that's a good reason to fight a world war, fighting over those resources?
Well, and kind of the unwritten part of all of this is, where are all of the railroad barons at? who's missing out on all of this opportunity?
Well, a lot of the railroad barons were members of the Pilgrim Society. And they're trading letters and telegrams with their partners over in London.
Yes.
So they have a vested interest.
Yes, they did.
And another, remember the railroad barons are right in bed with the Rockefellers, the oil barons. And the Rockefellers want a piece of this pie.
Yes.
That's a huge bit of this story is the Rockefellers.
Yes.
The other major oil dealers at the time, of course, Royal Dutch Shell was already in the game, and that's a big deal.
Yeah, so you have basically the Pilgrim Society watching the capture of a potential market that they're completely shut out of. Mm-hmm. And the comment that you made about locking up Persian, i.e. Iranian oil, is huge.
Yeah, because that would become the small company used to be known as British Petroleum, which was at one point the third biggest corporation in the world.
Yeah.
All right, by 1913, all this is going on, lead up to World War. Okay, first of all, we already talked over the last few weeks about some of the banking builds up of how we created the panic of 1907 allowed J.P. Morgan to become the lender of last resort for American banks, which led to the Aldrich-Vreeland Act, which was the predecessor of the Federal Reserve. 1913, the Federal Reserve Act is passed. We get the income tax. These lay in the grease for a war that's been planned for 2 decades.
Yes.
Because the same people doing all that most of them are pilgrims, or in Skull and Bones, or one of our other favorite secret societies, or non-secret. All of them. They're all working together in the same dinner clubs.
Yeah.
But by 1913, Winston Churchill, our hero, the Lord of the Admiralty, he's obsessed with upgrading the Navy that he previously didn't want to upgrade. He understands that oil is more efficient than coal. It's lighter, you can go faster, you can go further. England's got a ton of coal, but they've got no oil. Think that's an excuse to get into the colonial business? Go further into it? So this means Britain could be dependent on foreign suppliers like Standard Oil and Royal Dutch Shell. So Churchill urges the British to purchase a 51% stake in Persian Oil Company, which would become British Petroleum, for £2 million. Now, of course, Persians make the deal because they're promised 16% of the profits. And, of course, they got screwed because they weren't allowed to audit the books and they only got pennies, while the British Petroleum profits paid for the British lifestyle pretty much through the 20s and 30s. So that was one of the biggest screw jobs in business history. That, ladies and gentlemen, are the economic reasons, the real reasons that we fought the bloodiest war that led off to the bloodiest century in history. The assassination was not an accident. The assassination was an accident. The Archduke's car was only where it was because it had made a wrong turn. They were not following their supposed route. The assassin, who was one of 6 who was there in Sarajevo, he got lost himself. He stumbled into a deli, walked out of it, stepped down, and he sees the car right in front of him on accident, takes 2 shots, and boom, he starts a war. That's not what happened. It was an accident. It was a complete fluke. It was an excuse to light the tinder that had been set. The Austro-Hungarian Hawks, they had proposed a preemptive attack on Serbia for years, and now they've got their excuse. But they needed to know what Germany's reaction would be. They meet with the Germans, and Germany says we're going to offer you unlimited support because you got to answer to Serbia for killing your Archduke, right? Reasonable. But Germany gives them a blank check. And without that blank check, Vienna would likely have been much more restrained and not necessarily declared war. You can tell Germany had no intention and did not think that they were going to start World War I at all, because the day after that meeting with Vienna, The Kaiser and a bunch of their other leaders went on a 3-week holiday the next day. You don't do that if you're expecting a war. Austria then writes their demands to Serbia that are so extreme it's meant to provoke a war. Serbia accedes to almost all of Austria's demands. Almost all, but not all. And that's enough for Vienna to declare war on July 28th, 1 month to the day after the assassination. Russia's got a treaty with Serbia, so they mobilize their forces to defend Serbia. This causes Germany to declare war on Russia on August 1st. Germany declares war on France 2 days later. Of course, this requires invading Belgium, because you got to go through Belgium to get to France, which triggers Britain to declare war on Germany on August 4th. Within a week, most of Europe is at war, and it was all over banking and oil. And Winston Churchill's fingerprints were all over it, as were the fingerprints of the entire Pilgrim Society. And that's not the history we were taught, was it?
No.
The entire buildup to World War I and all that would follow can be squarely laid at the feet of bankers and oil barons, many of them pilgrims, not least of which was Winston Churchill. An entire generation of Eastern European men were wiped out, and a second generation of European men would be wiped out in World War II. Those men who would normally have been the workers to keep society going would have to be replaced. Replaced by whom? This was intentional, Colonel, and we know who did it. That's the end of my presentation for today. Next, we'll get into World War I itself, how Winston Churchill almost screwed the pooch there. Other things about other ways that diplomats and bankers were carving up the globe at the same time. We'll get to the Treaty of Versailles. We'll get to the League of Nations, Council of Foreign Relations, all that stuff, hopefully next week. But Winston Churchill is smack dab in the middle of all of it. So we're going to stay on him. And that's before we get to, 1930s and World War II.
Woo!
Quite a bit. What do you think, people?
That's awesome.
Yeah. So what was the question I asked at the beginning? What do the history books tell us about Winston Churchill, and what do you actually think of him now?
Yeah, the real history tells a completely different story than the fake history we've been shoveled.
Yeah, this whole time over in America, we're basically isolationists. We don't want to get in wars. They barely were able to pull off a Spanish-American War in 1898 without a public revolt in America. Most of the word on the street in this time period is we're not going to join a European war. That's their business. In the meantime, our diplomats and businessmen are over there whispering in the ears of their British counterparts saying, don't worry, we got your back. And as I talked about when I talked about J.P. Morgan, now we'll get to that next week. We'll save that for next week.
Okay, there's your teaser.
Well, it went quicker than I thought, but that's because I went on a rampage at the end.
It's hard not to.
Yeah. Like I said, I told the Colonel beforehand that I spent an awful lot of time researching this show more than usual because there's just so much to it, and connecting those dots, really understanding, take what they said and what actually happened are just not the same.
And as with everything that we've researched, it goes literally to following the money.
I agree.
Yep. And that's the piece that they leave out of history.
Yep, I'm just looking at the maps I have for next week. We're gonna have some more good stuff.
All wars are banker wars.
I've been saying that since before I was podcasting, and it remains true to this day. And if anybody wants, there is actually a video on YouTube called All Wars Are Banker Wars. It's really well done, and I agree with most of this guy's history. And that one's worth watching. If you're waiting, if you want something to occupy yourself between now and next Friday.
All right. With that, we're going to close this portion of Winston Churchill, part 2, next week. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us.